Imagine this. It's the dead of winter, the wind howling like a pack of wolves outside your flimsy wooden hut. Your fingers are so numb you can barely hold your drinking horn, and your breath freezes instantly into tiny clouds the moment you exhale. Now, picture living like that, but thousands of years ago without any central heating, electric blankets, or even a proper fur glove. Just cold steel, ice-coated landscapes, and a brutal fight for survival. Sounds impossible, right? Yet the Vikings did it. And not only did they endure the harshest northern winters, but they also forged metal tools and weapons that were up to 10 times stronger than anything their neighbors could produce. So how did they manage this uncanny metal magic in conditions that would freeze your eyelashes solid? Here's the kicker. The Vikings had a secret technique embedded deep in their smithing craft, something that modern scientists are still scratching their heads over. This might be the strangest Viking survival trick you've never heard about, but it changed everything. They weren't just bashing iron on anvils and hoping for the best. They controlled the chemistry of their metal like alchemists, making swords so tough and sharp that even the fiercest battle-hardened steel we have today can't quite match. It's like they had a magic recipe for metal durability that was part science, part art, and all absolutely genius. Let's dive into this secret. First, think of Viking metalwork as the medieval version of high-tech sports gear. When professional athletes want peak performance, they're not just wearing any old shoes. They use specially engineered materials designed to enhance speed, grip, and endurance. Vikings did something similar with their metal, tuning its structure so it could flex without breaking and slice through armor with ease. But instead of rubber soles and synthetic fibers, their gear was forged in fire, ice, and a very particular mix of materials buried in the metal itself. So what made their metal so unbelievably strong? The answer lies in a complex balance of carbon content and what blacksmiths call microstructure. To break that down, think of metal like a mosaic made up of tiny crystals. The shape, size, and arrangement of those crystals determine how the metal behaves, whether it's brittle like glass or flexible like a drawn-out wire. Vikings learned to manipulate these microscopic details through a clever heating and cooling process that essentially trained the steel to become tougher. Imagine if you could turn your favorite winter jacket into something 10 times warmer simply by adjusting how it's heated and cooled during manufacturing. That's essentially what the Vikings did, but with their swords and axes. By carefully heating their iron to just the right temperature, around 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit, then quenching it in a special solution, they locked in a perfect crystal structure. This wasn't random dunking in cold water. The Vikings used a variety of quenching liquids, sometimes water, sometimes oil, and sometimes something a bit more mysterious. Scientists today think they might have even used animal fats or plant extracts, turning their quenching baths into an ancient form of metallurgical alchemy that produced metal tougher and more resilient than anyone expected. Now, here's where it gets even more fascinating. Recent microscopic analyses reveal that Viking metal contains something called carbides, tiny, extremely hard particles dispersed evenly throughout the steel. These carbides act like microscopic armor plates, preventing cracks from spreading when the metal is under stress. It's a bit like nature's version of Kevlar, designed to absorb shocks and protect the whole structure from damage. So when a Viking smacked an enemy's shield or clashed swords with a rival, their blades stayed sharp without shattering. Every strike was like bouncing off a surface covered with invisible mini-tanks. But the Vikings didn't stop there. Their secret metal wasn't just tough, it had remarkable flexibility. You know how modern tech incorporates flexible screens on phones and wearable devices? That's because flexibility helps prevent breakage under pressure. Viking blades were designed to bend without snapping, a crucial trait in the chaos of battle. Imagine swinging a sword at -30 degrees F and having the metal flex like a spring rather than shatter like glass. This flexibility came from how they layered the metals during forging. The legendary, pattern-welded steel you might have heard of wasn't just for show. It was a scientifically smart way to combine layers with different properties to get the best of both worlds, hardness plus flexibility. To give you a modern comparison, think about carbon fiber. It's incredibly strong and light, made by layering thin sheets of carbon in specific patterns. The Vikings created the ancient carbon fiber of metalworking, producing blades that weighed just the right amount to be deadly but not exhausting. This layering also made their weapons visually stunning, with swirling designs that today we call Damascus steel. But the Vikings had their own style long before the name was coined. But all that strength and flexibility would have been useless if the metal was riddled with impurities. Here's the mind-blowing part. Vikings had an intuitive understanding of purification processes. They knew how to repeatedly heat, fold, and hammer the metal to squeeze out slag, rust, and unwanted materials, leaving behind only the purest parts. Think of this like the medieval version of a water filtration system, but for metal, reducing brittleness and boosting toughness with every hammer strike. In fact, they could get their iron purity close to 99%, which is impressive considering their tools were made without any modern chemical testing. And what about the environmental challenges? Picture the methodical challenge of forging metal in freezing temperatures, sometimes battling blizzards or working inside open-air smithies with smoke swirling into their eyes. The Vikings created specially insulated shelters for their forge fires, almost like ancient hot water bottles that kept the heat stable enough to avoid cracks during the cooling phase. This environmental control was crucial because quick temperature changes could shatter a blade. By maintaining steady temperatures, they minimized stress fractures and maximized durability. Now, you might think this was all the domain of expert smiths locked away in their workshops. But here's another twist. The Viking metal secret was shared knowledge, passed through generations like sacred family recipes. Each smith added his own tweaks, testing different ember combinations, quenching methods, and hammering rhythms. It was a living craft, blending art and science without the luxury of microscopes or spectral analyzers, just sharp eyes, skilled hands, and a warrior's understanding of what a good sword needed. Even today, metallurgists studying these ancient blades are amazed. Some modern labs report that Viking steel, due to its microstructure and carbon content varying from around 0.6% to 0.9%, often outperforms much of the early industrial-era steel produced with advanced methods. It's as if these medieval smiths cracked a code centuries ahead of their time. But the metal's power wasn't just technical, it was psychological. The Vikings believed their weapons carried the spirit of the ancestors, their very souls forged into every inch of steel. This belief might sound mystical, but consider how confidence in your tools can sharpen your focus in battle. It's like the difference between swinging a rickety kitchen knife and a finely balanced samurai sword. One inspires fear, the other respect. Of course, skill in battle and metal alone wouldn't guarantee survival. The harsh reality is, even the strongest metals couldn't stop frostbite, starvation, or long sea voyages. But the durability of Viking tools and weapons meant they could rely on their gear to function under extreme stress, whether cleaving through enemy shields, building sturdy longships, or crafting the tools needed to hunt and survive. Their metalwork was a cornerstone of resilience, and it didn't stop at weapons. Archaeologists have uncovered farming tools, fishing hooks, and even kitchen knives with the same advanced metallurgy techniques. Imagine using a blade that stays sharp after hundreds of fish caught in freezing rivers. It's the ancient predecessor of today's stainless steel knives. The Vikings were masters not just of war, but of day-to-day survival, engineering metal that held up to all aspects of their lives. So now you can probably guess why the Vikings left such a lasting legacy, despite the brutal nature of their world. Their secret to survival wasn't just fierce fighting or relentless raiding. It was the scientific mastery locked in every blade, every nail, and every piece of metal they shaped. This knowledge allowed them to adapt, innovate, and endure some of the coldest, harshest environments on Earth. But the story doesn't end here. Oh no, it only gets more fascinating. Because while metallurgy was the backbone of their survival, the Vikings incorporated even stranger environmental secrets into their craft, secrets that blurred the lines between nature, science, and sheer cunning. The next piece of their secret. It's something so unexpected that it will flip your entire understanding of Viking technology upside down. Ready to learn how fire, ice, and even mythical runic symbols played a role in reinforcing their legendary metal? Stay with me, because what's coming next will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about these fierce warriors and their astonishing science. Now, here's the part that blows minds even more. The Vikings didn't just rely on furnace heat and quenching baths. They incorporated ice itself into their secret metal-making formula. Yeah, you heard that right, ice. Picture this. After carefully heating their iron to around 1,400 degrees F, they'd plunge their blades into icy cold river water, or even directly into snow and crushed ice. It sounds like a recipe for disaster. Imagine cracking your smartphone screen by throwing it into sub-zero water. But for the Vikings, this shock cooling was a deliberate and precise move to transform the microstructure of the steel. What exactly happened? Rapid cooling traps carbon atoms tightly in the iron crystal lattice, creating a formation called martensite, which is what gives the steel incredible hardness and strength. But here's the twist. Fast enough quenching could also make the metal brittle, prone to snapping like a frozen twig. So how did the Vikings avoid this? They carefully timed the immersion, sometimes dipping blades partially or stirring the water to control the cooling rate. This was the medieval version of a state-of-the-art cooling system, like how modern athletes use ice baths to carefully reduce inflammation without shocking the body into trauma. But the ice wasn't just a tool, it was virtually an ingredient in the recipe. Some historians now believe the Vikings chose forge sites close to glacial streams on purpose, knowing that the chilling water held minerals and organic compounds that subtly infused the metal's surface, acting like natural anti-corrosion agents. Think about it. A metal sword that not only slices through armor, but also doesn't rust from the salty sea spray during long ocean voyages. That's like layering your bike with a futuristic rust-proof coating and getting it for free from nature. And speaking of nature, the Vikings also engaged a surprising alliance with plant life. Yes, plants. Recent research suggests that their mysterious quenching liquids sometimes contained extracts from local herbs and trees, like birch bark, known for its natural oils and tannins. These botanical compounds could have acted like an ancient form of rust inhibitor and lubricant, helping to prevent cracking during the intense heating and cooling cycles. Imagine your car's oil filter doubling as a strength enhancer for your engine metal. That's the kind of multi-benefit Viking alchemy we're talking about. This might sound far-fetched, but plant-based compounds actually slow down the cooling rate just enough to cure brittleness but keep hardness high, creating a perfect balance. Modern metallurgy calls this tempering, and the Vikings, without labs or microscopes, discovered it intuitively through trial, error, and centuries of observation. It's a bit like discovering that a special family recipe causes dough to rise just right without knowing the biology of yeast. Pure craft blended with experimentation. Now, layering these botanical coolants with ice, heat, and the right hammering rhythm was basically the Vikings' answer to modern metallurgy's complex heat treatment cycles, which today can involve precision temperature controls, milliseconds-long quenching times, and custom chemical baths. The Vikings managed it all with just fire, sweat, water, and intuition, turning wild northern elements into a finely tuned workshop. But the real magic lies deeper, in something that transcends the physical. Viking runes. These runes were much more than cryptic symbols carved into wood or stone. They were believed to carry mystical power, and were often etched onto blades and tools before battle or ceremonial use. Now, science won't back the magic spells themselves, but the act of incising runes and patterns on metal actually had a metallurgical side effect too. Here's why. Carving deep into the blade's surface created tiny stress lines that forced the steel to relax during the forging process, redistributing internal stresses that could otherwise cause microfracture. It's like how modern engineers use tiny perforations or grooves in materials to control stress and improve fatigue life. Only Viking-era smiths crafted these patterns by hand, as part of the war ritual. So these etched runes were simultaneously a symbolic blessing and a practical technique to reinforce and heal the blade from within. And those patterns, combined with the famed Damascus-style layering, weren't just visual artistry. They distributed forces across the blade dynamically, creating zones where the metal flexed, bent, or resisted pressure differently at precise points. Imagine modern bionic prosthetics that mimic human bone density gradients to avoid breakage. Except this was a 1,000-year-old secret forged by warriors who, without scientific jargon, understood their tools as extensions of their own bodies. But here comes the craziest part. The metal itself, thanks to these techniques, could store what's called elastic potential energy, meaning a Viking sword could absorb the shock on impact and release it like a spring. Picture cracking open a coconut with a bamboo stick without breaking it. The metal's ability to snap back made it less likely to shatter and more likely to cut through your opponent's gear. This resiliency was crucial because Viking battles were chaotic dances of power and precision, often fought in icy mud or on slippery decks of longships. A brittle sword would snap and cost a life, but the Viking sword's secret resilience was the difference between survival and defeat. Scientists today test blade toughness using instruments called impact testers, and Viking steel holds up impressively, often scoring higher than many steel alloys made with early industrial methods. Now let's zoom out. All this mastery over fire, ice, herbs, layering, and even symbolic carving reveals a culture deeply intertwined with nature and science long before either word existed. The Vikings weren't just barbaric raiders, they were keen observers and experimenters, like ancient materials engineers and chemists. Imagine a group of welders, botanists, and artists huddled around a forge in the dead of winter, each adding their knowledge to perfect the ultimate weapon and tool. This wasn't just crafting, it was a way of life, a crucible of survival forged by necessity and ingenuity. Yet, for all their knowledge, the Vikings faced declining resources, competition, and eventually the rise of better forged steel from other parts of Europe and Asia. The secrets faded, tucked away like lost manuscripts, until modern technology barely caught up centuries later. But the echoes of those ancient forges live on in museums and across blacksmith hamlets, inspiring craftspeople who continue to marvel at what could be achieved with little more than iron, cold air, and relentless human spirit. So what can we take away from this? Beyond the historical wow factor, the Viking secret reminds us that innovation doesn't spring from fancy labs alone. It's born from adapting to harsh realities, blending observation with tradition, and pushing limits with courage. Like the frozen rivers that tempered their blades, challenges shape us, harden us, and sometimes, like the Vikings' metal, make us 10 times stronger than anyone ever thought possible. Every blade, every tool, every etched rune carries within it the fierce will to survive and to protect family, legacy, and the future. It's a timeless story, humans versus nature, science interwoven with art, and the quest for mastery in the face of impossible odds. So next time you hold a sharp knife in your hand or marvel at a high-tech alloy, remember the Vikings, those icy northern warriors who turned cold winters and roaring fires into a secret science of survival. Their story isn't just about swords. It's about human resilience, curiosity, and the fiery heart of innovation that burns inside us all. And maybe, just maybe, there's a little Viking spirit in each of us, waiting to be forged by the challenges and fires of our own lives.